But as I do that, I want to give a brief introduction. We welcome you all to the AMA Higher Ed SIG. This is our spring research webinar. We are so thankful that you've all come, and we are grateful for our guest speaker, Professor Giampaolo Viglia, who is editor-in-chief of Psychology and Marketing. And just to give you a little bit of intro about him, and he has done a tremendous job growing the Journal of Psychology and Marketing. They have a Scopus Site Score in 2023 of 12.1 and the impact factor of 8.9. And I am confident that's only going to increase when the 2024 numbers come out. When he's not doing that, Professor Viglia is also the Professor of Marketing and Research Lead for the Market Subject Group at University of Portsmouth. He also, in his spare time, serves as Associate Editor of the Annals of Tourism Research. His research interests revolve around consumer decision-making, pricing, services, including tourism and hospitality marketing. He has published, reviewed, and guest edited for top journals such as Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, the Journal of Retailing, International Journal of Research and Marketing, the Journal of Product Innovation Management, and the Journal of Service Research, among many others. So thank you so much. I'm going to still be letting people in. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Please keep your cameras on, but your microphones off, as we have over 120 people in this Zoom. So, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to take a picture, and then we're going to cover the questions you put in the chat. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Editor Giampaolo Viglia.
So first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jackie. You're doing a tremendous work with the AMA Higher Education SIG Research web events. And so it's really my pleasure to be here. And I'm glad that to see many young scholars that are entering in the job market. They are working with their research. So we're gonna keep this relatively short, of course, but at the end, I'm very open to answer to any questions that you might have. Jackie, do you want me to share the slides, or you would? Probably you are muted, but it's fine. I can do it. Okay. Okay. If maybe I can. I can do it. Let me see if we do it with that. Okay, I think we can. You are able to see that. I will increase the size of this so that we will go full screen. But that's basically it. So, well, I want to start giving you a short overview, and of course. Jackie already said something about me and what I do and so on and so forth. I want to say that I've not only published, but I've also been rejected widely. So this is something that should be kept in mind because the acceptance rate in journalists is 9%. So actually, you know, publishing is hard, and we should do what we can, and we should actually, you know, be positive. Sometimes we need to rework on our work and go on. The reason why we are focusing on experimental research is that experimental research helps you to prove causation. which is very important in research, because we can have a research that explore some phenomena, and that would be generally qualitative research, or we have a research that looks at correlation, but experiments are one of the fewer methods to be able to prove causation. And this is really essential when we deal with empirical question in marketing. So I've created a slide here that summarizes where experiments are. So with a direct approach and a qualitative approach, like exploratory approaches, you can have interviews and focus group. With a confirmatory approach, asking questions, you generally have surveys, and then you have structural question modeling, or all these kind of approaches. With an exploratory indirect approach, it would be it would be observation or projective techniques. And then when we have a confirmatory indirect approach, we have experiments. And let me start with an example. Now, if you are comparing these two pictures and you want to see the impact of a paid partnership, knowing that it's a paid partnership, then what happens is that you should compare two exactly equal images. In this slide here, you have too many confound effects, too many things going on. I mean, some people might prefer the lipstick type of advertisement, not because it's not a paid partnership. There is no evidence of being a paid partnership, like I highlighted in with the blue rectangle, but because simply there are different comments, or there is a different picture, and so on and so forth. So really, in experiments, we need to be able to control things, which means, what does it mean? It means that we only change one thing between the control and the treatment. So we need to keep it as simple as possible, and we need to have a randomization. What does randomization means? It means that as experimenter, we randomly assign people into a treatment condition or a control condition. I always make an example from medicine, meaning because experiments are coming actually from our science. In medicine, if you want to prove that paracetamol is more effective than water in helping you reducing temperature, the methodological way, that is a scientific way to prove that, is to assign to half of the people paracetamol, to the other half of the people placebo, just water or whatever, and then you see after a few hours what happened to the group that took paracetamol with respect to the group that took placebo. So some people or students, maybe especially if they come from a qualitative background, they are concerned, okay, but experiments are hard, maybe it's difficult from a quantitative point of view, I need a huge statistical knowledge, and so on and so forth. That's actually not the case, because in reality, in experiments, we are only comparing means. So we have a control group and a treatment group, what I called here an experimental group. That's a treatment group. With the experimental group, we have an intervention that was taking paracetamol, or it could be, having a luxury product compared with a regular product, or the value of the name of the brand for the stock market price of that particular company, and so on and so forth. So we have an intervention in one group, we don't have an intervention in the other group, and then we see a T+1, meaning after the intervention, if there is a significant difference between the two groups. So we are only comparing means. We can have these two groups with a between subject design or a within subject design. What's the difference? The difference is that if we have a between subject design, a person is either assigned to the treatment group or to the control group, but not to both. while within subject design, the same person is assigned to both conditions. So let's imagine that one condition is a particular shampoo from one brand, and another condition is another shampoo from another brand. Within subject design, our participants will try both brands and then tell us which one they prefer, which one they would buy, and so on and so forth. In the between subject condition, one group of participants will see a brand, the other group will see another brand, and then we will compare these two groups. So there are many examples of between or within design. Cutting through the verbiage, I will tell you that it's more common in marketing to have between subject designs. And the reason why we have between subject design is that within subject designs, you might have learning effects, meaning what you answer to the second product, for instance, might be affected to what you answer to the first product. So you might have this confounding effect, and for this reason, we generally have between subject design. It's of course, we don't have a huge amount of time. I don't enter in the specifics, but if you have questions on that, I will be able to discuss more from a statistical point of view, what are the difference between and within subject design. I wrote here that we have sequential between subject design and simultaneous between subject design, because sometimes we have the between subject design at the same time, meaning one group is today assigned to one condition and another group also today is assigned to another condition, while in other cases we have different times. So we have it between, but across time. But that's a technicality. Again, between subject design is often the way to go. Another important question in experiments is how big the sample, our sample should be. And the answer to this question can be automatized. We have a website called Gpower, where if you input some of your pilot data, meaning a very small experiment with a small number of participants, the Gpower website will tell you, is from the University of Düsseldorf. So if you just type Gpower University of Düsseldorf, you find it easily. It will tell you how big the sample should be given the type of question that you have and the type of data that you have. Let me give you an example. If you are comparing paracetamol with placebo, the difference is so big that even with 30 participants, you will be able to claim that paracetamol is more effective than placebo to reduce temperature. However, if you are comparing paracetamol with aspirin, they are both effective in reducing temperature. Paracetamol is more effective, but they are both effective. And so you would need a bigger sample. Why? Because the effect size is slightly lower between the two conditions, the paracetamol and the aspirin. So that's where we are essentially. So in this formula, you should only remember the very last fraction, which is that the number of your sample depends on the standard deviation at the numerator and the effect size at the denominator. The bigger the standard deviation is in your data, meaning the noise that you have in your data, the bigger sample that you need. The bigger the effect size, meaning the average difference between the two conditions, the lower the sample you need. So that's the basic of experiments. And I will give you at the end a paper such that you will have all these things explained, so that when you are at home or in the office or in the library revising things, you have a guidance that will be hopefully helpful. So I really hope that this is, I'm scrolling down the slides. I'm reading, yes, it's a PDF. So you can see the other elements, but do you see the slides or you don't see them at all?
No, we can see the slides. It's
Okay.
just that the bottom half gets cut off. So when you get to that part, if you could just slide down.
Okay, let me,
That's
yes,
perfect.
let me just make sure that I will increase the size so that you can see it. I'm not sure if
Yeah, I think if you just scroll down as when you get to the bottom half material,
right,
that would work perfect.
right, perfect.
Also, can I send them the PDF after the
Of
presentation?
course you can. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Thank you so
That's great.
much.
No, very happy, very happy. Yes, I have a question in the chat, and then I will go back. It's correct. One of you said to reduce the size of the slide, which is a very good suggestion. Let me see if it's here, because I generally work with PowerPoint, so here I'm struggling a little.
Sir, it's there on right side in the middle. The
Okay, I think
minus.
with this is fine. Yes, should be
Yes,
fine.
thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, generally, to answer to the question in the chat, it's better also to have a control group because they will say, okay, you are just comparing two different situations, but what would be the control, meaning what would have happened if you didn't have any intervention. So that's something that we need to do. And also we need to control for other possible intervening factors, for instance, age, gender, weather. Reviewers might tell you, okay, I see the difference, but have you control for this? Have you control for that? So you want to make sure that you control for many things that might have gone on, and you have this data, and you can say that the results are robust after controlling for age, gender, social status, whatever variables might be relevant in your setting. So I told you we need to keep it real. So in an experiment, it's really important, ideally, to have field experiments, meaning to run the experiment in the real environment where something happens. That's very, very powerful because if you show that an effect works and people do pay a price for buying that product, is much more effective than just looking at their willingness to pay, right? So it's much more effective if you have a behavioral depending variable. So in terms of the outcome, we might look at possible mediators and moderators that alter the relationship. So before we were saying, okay, we have one control and one treatment, we have our intervention, and we look at our dependent variable. Now I'm telling you, that's a perfect starting point, but we might think at possible variables that increase or decrease the strength of the relationship. And that would be a moderator. Now, for instance, this paper, Chen et al., is a paper that appeared in the Journal of Marketing and is a very simple experiment. They are looking at the request for rating a service before asking for a tip, and they specifically look at the market of Lyft, which is the equivalent of Uber in the United States. You have both Uber and Lyft. It's a car renting service that you might use when you want to move from place A to place B, and you just open your app and you book a car. And what happens is that they wanted to investigate whether rating a service before or after asking for a tip will increase the amount that they leave in terms of tips. And they were specifically investigating if the effect was varying depending on the fact they pay with their own money, meaning it could be business money or they could be their money. So it could be the company money or their own money. And that would be a moderator, meaning it's a variable that intervenes in the main relationship and might strengthen or decrease that relationship. For instance, let me give you another example. We all like now digital banking, do things with our bank online, but a moderator could be the age. If you are 85 years old, you might prefer to still go to a local branch and talk with a real person and have this human connection. You don't like just to be connected online and do things online, but you want to have a rapport with somebody. So that would be a moderator that decreases the strength of the relationship between the going for digital banking and the happiness of our customers. So that's the idea of the moderator. The mediator instead is a third variable that explains why X is causing Y. So this is more rich theoretically because it's not just explaining a situation when the relationship is stronger or weakened, but it explains the process. So it explains why X affects Y. And an example is that if you compare the ratings in Airbnb with respect to Booking.com, you will see that people leave much better rating in Airbnb. So you wonder whether every stay in Airbnb is a bliss or if there is something else. And generally what happens is that a mediator can be empathy, meaning if you go to a real person that has an Airbnb and you leave a negative review, you feel you are attacking that person, or you are scared of a possible retaliation, that this person will also write a negative review about you, or you are just more sympathetic because you say it's not a proper business, it's a house, there might be something going on, there are accidents, and so you might avoid to leave an extremely negative review in that case. While in Booking.com, you feel it's more professional, and if you are dissatisfied, you say it without an issue. So again, a mediator is a third variable that is part of the process, meaning explains why X is causing Y. So I'm summarizing this with a slide so that is not a mouthful. So the mediator should be both related with the X and the Y, while the moderator is only increasing or decreasing the relationship. The moderator empirically is an interaction effect. The mediator is richer empirically because you have to run a couple of regression to see whether once controlling for the mediator, the main relationship is still significant or not. With the mediator, you care about the process, why X affects Y. With the moderator, you care about the context, when, where, and for whom this relationship holds. So these are the two different things. For the mediator is how and why the relationship holds. Then we have also different type of experiments. The lab experiments nowadays are generally online experiments. We run them online in Prolific, Mechanical Turk, and so on and so forth, or through Qualtrics. The field experiments, as I'm saying, are in the actual environment, and for this reason, they are very well appreciated about from journals. So if you have a paper and you have 2 or 3 studies, if one of those is a field experiment, then the field experiment is very appreciated by journals because you show real evidence. And then you have alternative type of experiments like quasi-experiments or discrete choice experiments. In marketing, we generally have quasi-experiments where you are not in control of the randomization. Think about the case of tariff. I know that, AMA is based in the United States. From the UK, we are observing what is happening. Right now, you have tariff in the United States. So that would be a quasi-experiment. You have a before and after, before tariff and after tariff. and you see what happens to marketing transaction, to the price of goods and services, to the economy, and so on and so forth. So having a before and after is very powerful to compute what happens, but you are not in full control. Why? Because you are not in control. You are not the experimenter that decided to implement tariff and decide which customers got tariff and which are not. The customer might be different. Some might move countries, some might arrive. So it's not a perfect design, but it's still an experiment because there is a before and after. And there is this nice 2022 paper from Goldfarb, Catherine Tucker, and Wang in the Journal of Marketing that offers a great guidance for running quasi-experiments. Summarizing a little bit what we are saying, what I want to stress is that more and more journals are requiring that the study participants are from the population of interest and that the Y, your dependent variable, is a measure of actual behavior. So for instance, let's imagine that we try to understand what attributes people like in luxury hotel, 5-star hotels. Now, if we investigate this online with undergraduate students, that's problematic with two reasons. First, many undergraduate students might not have yet the wealth for going to a 5-star hotel. So maybe the answer that they give you are biased because they are not part of the population of interest. Second, if you are asking a question hypothetically, imagine that you are in a 5-star hotel and this and that. It doesn't mean that if you are in that real environment, that would translate in real behavior. I mean, I can tell you, imagine that it's raining outside and you need an umbrella, and then you tell me, okay, I would not pay more than $10 for an umbrella. But if it's raining cat and dogs and you are there outside, maybe you would be willing to pay 20 maybe dollars for have an umbrella. So we need a leap of faith to believe that the question that we have in the lab will translate into real behavior. And of course, it's hard to set up many field experiments and so on and so forth. So I'm not telling you that any experimental paper should have field experiments, but I'm telling you that to it a very top ranked journals, you need, if you run an experimental study, to have at least a field study. It could be in a cafeteria downstairs. It doesn't need to be with Amazon or with Apple. It could be with a very small shop. But still, you need to provide some real evidence. There is also a way to provide realism in the lab. And a way to provide realism in the lab is to anchor the choice of people to the money that they get. So for instance, if they get £5 or $5 to or $10 for attending an experiment in the lab or online, and there is a decision to take how much they're willing to pay for a mug, well, if they say that they're willing to pay 5, at the end, they need to get with their money that they got for the experiment, they need to take the mug for $5. This means that what they are telling you is generally what they really feel, because they will go along with their decision. They should act and use their own participants' incentive for buying that particular gadget or whatever. So I've summarized the idea, okay, when should we run an experiment? Where should we run a survey? When should we have just secondary data, meaning social media data? And this chart should help you with that. So the first question you should ask is, okay, do we need a primary data to answer to the question? Meaning there are no data on that specific question. If there is no need because there is already secondary data on that, you can use secondary data. And if you need to test for causality, then you need a natural experiments. Well, if not, you just use secondary data and you see what happened. Using a natural experiment would be a sort of what I call quasi-experiments before, meaning there was something that happened in real life, and then you look at what happened before and after. Then if you need, so going back to the first question, is primary data required to answer the question? If the answer is yes, the second question is wondering whether the dependent variable is unobservable. If it's unobservable, then we need to collect survey data. Meaning we use a survey, we collect some data on an unobservable variable. An unobservable variable could be empathy, meaning it's a construct and you have some items for that construct. In that case, if we need causality, it should be a survey experiment online. If we don't need causality, it could be a PLS structural equation model study. Then, always going to the first column, does the question require testing for causality? If the question requires testing for causality, we have a field experiment or a quasi-experiment. If not, we can just look at what happens in the field. It could be even a qualitative observation, like an ethnography or an ethnography to see what is happening in the environment. What is currently conventional with experiments? Well, with experiments, it's conventional to have a pre-registration, meaning to register your study, meaning have your hypotheses and say what you expect and so on. And it's important because it helps with the credibility of what you are proposing, meaning pre-registering a study simply means, okay, for this study, we're investigating 2 research questions or 3 hypotheses, and we do a field study and a field experiment. The field study will do this, and the lab study will do that. They will give credibility when you submit. You say, okay, here is the protocol that I pre-registered, and it gives credibility to what you have done. Now, I knew that we had less than 1 hour to discuss experiments, and as you might imagine, we would require more time. But this paper should be helpful because we summarize in this article how to design good experiments in marketing. So there is most of what we have discussed and much more, with actual screenshots from SPSS and other softwares to make it very hands-on. So it's no fluffy stuff and ultra theoretical and statistician stuff, but it's very hands-on. You have some statistical knowledge, the one that you require, because of course you cannot go blind. You really need to know what you're doing, but it's also very applied. So I encourage you to have a look at it, and I'm sure that you can download from the library from your university for free. But just in case, when I will send the slides to Jackie, I will also send this paper so she can share it if you are interested. And with this idea of transparency, this is becoming more and more important. And so you can also, we were talking about pre-registering, but you can also upload your data online in a repository such that people can look at this data and they can replicate maybe the experiments in another environment. So we have evidence that if you share the data, generally the work is cited more. First of all, it's perceived as more trustable, meaning you are not concerned of sharing your data. You are willing to share, but it's also cited more. So we are moving also towards pre-registration, means is what I told you before, pre-registering the study. So I will not discuss that again, but there is a website for pre-registration that is called spredicted.org, where you can pre-register your study if you are interested. So what is my take home from the day? And then I will open up to the question, because I promised Jackie we were keeping short than 1 hour so that we can have maybe some Q&A or answer to some question that you might have. My suggestion is to test things causally. For testing things causally, you need experiments. And especially field experiments, test things in the real environment. So we want to replace guesses and show the correlation with what actually works causally. Interesting, this is a book that I've read from Steven Davidovich, and it's called Everybody Lies, and says that when we deal with people, we never completely open up. We open up maybe 90%, even with our mom, okay? We will just open up 90%, but instead we open up 100% to Google. Mr. Google knows our dirtiest secrets. So if we feel sick and we have we want to see if we have a rash and we wonder what is this rash about, Mr. Google knows that that day we became sick. And I would say this book was in 2017. Now it's probably Mr. Generative AI that knows our dirty secret more than Mr. Google, but more or less the thing doesn't change. So this is what we cover in this small part, but I'm very happy to answer to any question that you might have, and I will share both this deck. Already Jackie has it, and I will just share that article as well, so that if you want to get going with experiments, and I encourage you to get going. Sometimes, this type of talks should give you the energy to start and say, okay, that's the day. It's like when you want to start a diet, you need a pump priming and say, okay, I need that, and then I get going. And this will hopefully help you with that. So I really hope it's beneficial. Thank you all.
That was phenomenal. Thank you so much. I know I learned so much in just a short time. We'll do a few questions and then we'll do a photo. I've been writing down the questions as they come in. So there was one question about, can you compare two experimental conditions without having a control group?
Yes, I was answering to that during the talk, saying that it's better to have a control group because people could tell you, okay, what would have happened without doing anything? So you are not 100% sure what would have happened without doing anything. So if you have that, it's better. If you don't, sometimes it's fine. You're just comparing, for instance, let me say, you're comparing a virtual influencer and a human influencer. That's fine not to have a control group because you have influencers and then you compare two types of influencers. If it's an advertising message, without having influencer, of course, people cannot buy any product. So that would be fine. Okay, but in general, having a control is important. I just shared that paper I was referring to. So if you open it up at the end, you will see that there is a rich appendix with guidance on how to run the things on the software.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing the article. The next question was that when we control for too many control variables, can that create noise?
Yes. Well, I would say to keep it brief, okay? Because if not, it will be very, very long and tedious, okay? So especially a field experiment, if it's in the field, you don't want to bother people with a long survey, asking for many questions, and so on and so forth. But you should really be conscious of the literature. So you start from the literature and the theoretical underpinning, and you see what are the variables that are likely to affect something, what is at stake. And then based on that, you control for these variables in the field, because the worst scenario is that after you have run your experiment, somebody tells you, okay, it's really important to control for this variable, and you don't have that variable, and then you will need to rerun everything from scratch.
Okay. Then we had a discussion about PLS SEM versus process, and Hannah shared an article. But do you have any comments on which you prefer?
Well, I would say they are just tools, okay? So if you are investigating a question where you have a constructs, okay? So you have several items and so on and so forth. Then is a survey experiments, and you might analyzing through SEM. You have several constants and variable and so on. The reality is that for experimental research in general, the difference is that in structural question modeling, we have a very big survey with many questions, many hypotheses, and that's the core study of your work. With experiments, we have multiple experiments. One experiment is looking at the main relationship and establishing the effect. Another experiment is finding a boundary condition where or how there is a situation where this effect doesn't hold, which would be the moderator, like we discussed. Or another experiment look at that in the field, or an experiment looking at the process, why X is causing Y. So that's how an experimental paper is constructed. So generally, you don't want to have many hypotheses. Why? Because to me, also as a reviewer and as an editor, I can tell you that when you have so many hypotheses and so many conditions, it's also hard to sell the main message of the paper. There are so many things going on, and sometimes, especially early career researchers do this mistake to put so many things, I'm Italian by origin, as you can, even if I'm British citizen, now I'm British citizen, I'm Italian by origin. And in Italy, we say that, the best pasta is the tomato pasta with some basil, meaning you don't need a super fancy dish. Now, the more you complicate the experimental design, the more hypotheses you have, the more conditions you need, the more the message gets complicated. Now, don't forget that the main goal of an experiment is to prove causally that X affects Y. So we want to control for possible intervening variable. We want to make sure, but we don't want to add so many things, because if not, it becomes very complex to untangle. And again, also the message of the paper is important. And when I refer to the storytelling of the paper, I'm not referring at the grammar, at the syntax of the paper. I'm just referring at the easiness of the story, at the idea for a reviewer to grasp immediately when they read the abstract introduction. Oh, that's interesting because they are looking at this. And if you're looking at 20 things or 15 hypotheses, it's hard. Imagine even a reviewer is a person that maybe work all day, arrive at home and says, okay, I have to revise this paper. And it's so complex with so many things going on that is a laundry list of contribution. And instead, it's much better to have 2 or 3 substantive contributions rather than a laundry list of incremental things.
Okay, thank you. Then next we had some scaling questions with experiments. Can we use a mix of Likert and semantic scales, or will that cause issues? And related to that, how to transform control variables such as demographics to fit the type of scaling so we can test moderation.
Right. So first of all, sometimes the demographic variables can also be moderators. So it depends on your theoretical positioning. Maybe a demographic variable, if you want to prove that one effect will hold only for young people or for a particular gender and so on and so forth, that would be essential part of your story. So it would not be a control variable. You can use semantic scale. My suggestion is to use already adopted scale because that's not the main goal of your study. If not, you should come up with a developmental scale study. So you just want to use scales that are validated. You can adapt them to your environment. But I would use already validated scales. And again, be guided from the theory on what are the control and instead core variables.
Okay. And then we've had more questions come in if you've got a few more minutes.
Of course.
One is, I am curious how we can do a 3x3 between subject manipulation and what would be the sample size for one condition. And
Okay.
I had also a question relating to how big should the sample size be for
Yes.
condition.
Okay, so the statistical answer is that for the central limit theorem, you get that if the population has a normal distribution, the sample has a normal distribution if the sample is bigger than 40 per cell. So at least it should be 40 per cell. Less than 40 per cell, forget it. When the effect size is small, you might need a bigger sample, and how big is answered by the G power tool I was discussing, because you will input some pilot data that you have in this tool, and then it tells you the optimal sample that you need not to have an underpowered experiment. My suggestion is not to have a 3x3 between subject manipulation because it will be already very complicated. You will have 9 conditions, it's hard to sell. So I would go for a 2x2 or at most a 2x3 and avoid to have a 3x3. Better to unpack the experiment. So you focus on one aspect with the first experiment, and then you include another aspect on the second one.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we have questions about neuromarketing lab studies. That the data sometimes shows effect when you compare the descriptive data, but it is super hard to see a significant impact in conventional tests. How much you value this descriptive data for drawing conclusions? You know, and the idea that we have heat maps and so forth.
Yes. Let me just read because it's they are a good support. So what is happening is more and more we need complementary approaches to prove causality and demonstrate a research relationship. And a visual evidence is very effective. So even in experiments, we didn't discuss that too much today, but when you want to show at which level a moderator is significant, we generally use a floodlight analysis or a spotlight analysis to show graphically, and it's in the paper that I'm sharing with you, to graphically show when an effect becomes significant. And similarly, eye tracking, heat maps, emotional maps are very important to see what is going on. Figures and tables are more effective from a communication standpoint. You know that one of the neurodevelopmental issues that we have in society is ADHD, which is, you know, the idea that it's a bit of issues with attention, okay? And today we are swamped with the stimuli, and sometimes we reduce our attention. And clinicians say that the best way to tackle that is to have maps and figures. And even in research, to see the effect visually and graphically is very effective, because you actually see what is going on, and it's much easier for reviewers and readers to see that. I'm sure that even when we discussed today, I was seeing that some of you were taking screenshots when I was showing some figures more than when I was showing some text. Why? Because a chart that tells you when you run a survey experiment, where you run a field, where you just want to collect secondary data is more useful than a list telling you you need to do this, this, and that. It's much helpful to have a chart.
Okay, let's do, I think we've got maybe two more questions. The next one is how to address endogeneity issues in experimental research.
Well, I will tell you that luckily in experimental research, if we randomize people into conditions, there is a control and a treatment group. By definition, we don't have endogeneity. So if it's tightly controlled, we don't have endogeneity. We do have endogeneity maybe in quasi-experiments. We might have endogeneity with the correlational studies, and of course we would need in that case to find instrumental variables that would be the answer to prove causality. But in experiments, by definition, we don't have huge endogeneity issues.
Okie doke. And then someone asked, can we develop a manipulation check if it's not already available in the literature? And a related scaling is, do you recommend using the same measurement scales to compare results between studies, or can you modify the scales?
Well, for the first question, you can develop a manipulation check, especially if it's a straight type of situation. For instance, you write a review about a restaurant that is generic and a review that is specific, and you want to claim that a specific review is more helpful. Why? Because they can read actually what have you eaten, what was the exact price, what were the options, while the generic that says just it's fantastic, go there, is not very informative. You can ask a manipulation check saying, was this review specific or was this review generic on a scale to 1 to 7, even if it's not validated from the literature. So it's just a manipulation check that would be fine. For comparing the studies, if you use different scales and there are also different things going on between the studies, that might become tricky, because what would happen is that reviewers will tell you, okay, is the difference between the studies because of the different context, maybe banking versus fashion, or it's because you have used a different scale with different items. So to use different scales, I would use exactly the same setting and prove that maybe the scales are equal in terms of results, and then you can, so you would have to have a pre-test to show that the scale doesn't affect the results, and then you can run your main study.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a tremendous session, and I know I learned a lot, and I think everyone else did too. We had fantastic conversations going on in the chat. I would love to take a picture of everybody, so I think if we'll have Giampaolo, if you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen. And
I'm
so
ugly, so I don't want to be very big, but okay, I just push.
I think we've still got over 100 people in the room. Yeah, we
Yes.
had our highest was
Yes.
151.
Yes, it's
So
a great pleasure. Thank you for being here. And you know, for us, seeing so many young people, early career researchers that want to learn is always an experience. I mean, I feel, you know, I'm a father of a child, but often now I feel father of so many researchers, and it's a great experience. And again, my main message, apart from the experiments, you have the PDF of the file and so on. Do not give up. So sometimes you are ahead, sometimes you are behind, sometimes there are days that you say, oh, it's hard, and so on and so forth. But if you are passionate, if you like your job, you will find your way. It might be in a research intense university, it might be in a blended research and teach university, whatever, you will find your way. Just work on things that you are passionate and find people that have complementary experiences. If you are an expert in qualitative research, work with somebody that is good at quantitative, or if you are expert of quantitative, work with somebody that is good at writing. So make sure that you form a team of people that have complementary expertise and will help you to push the discipline forward.
excellent, excellent advice. I'm going to take a quick shot so everybody can smile. I'm going to take one more. Okay. Well, thank you all so very much for coming, for giving us your time. I had the link if you'd like to join the AMA Higher Ed. I'll be sending out the slides later today. And Giampaolo put his article that he referenced in the chat. So if you want to grab that before you head out, and the video will be posted on, once I get it out of the cloud, I'll send it to Brian Talion, who posted on our YouTube page for the AMA Higher Ed SIG. And thank you all so much for coming. So depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and have a—
Jackie, they want the picture, so from the chat, so, but I assume that you will share a LinkedIn post or something with the AMA.
Yes, the
education,
AMA
so-
Higher Ed SIG will be
Yes.
posting the picture. Yeah, so let me, now if you would take off your slides, we could get everybody all at once, because we have 95 people still on.
Because the experiment was to see if after 1 hour you had happy faces or sad faces. So that's what.
So if we wanted to get everybody in one shot, I would need you to take off your PDF.
Yes. Brilliant. You want what you want, Jackie,
So
now?
if you could remove your PDF, and that
Yeah,
way
sure.
I can get everybody in the picture.
I will close it down. Let me just yeah.
If you just want to unshare.
Yeah, because sadly, okay.
Yeah, if you click, I think if you click stop share.
It doesn't. Okay, I found it. Okay, great.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so if everybody that's on, if you could turn on your cameras, and I'm going to take a few shots, but so I'll give everybody another minute to turn on their cameras. And okay, I'm going to take the picture in 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more. Okay, thank you all so much. Follow the AMA Higher Ed SIG on LinkedIn, which they'll be posting this picture. And thank you all so much for coming. And thank you, Professor Giampaolo Viglia, for such a phenomenal session.
It's a pleasure. I see many familiar faces also in the audience. I know Gina, people that have submitted to psychology and marketing, or they are part of the family. So my suggestion is do not give up. Sometimes you get rejection. Sometimes, again, I want to stress, work hard, and in the long term, the results will come.
I completely concur that if you just expect that hit to bring you happiness, that is 5 minutes of happiness. You've got to enjoy the process, enjoy the people you work with. That's what enriches you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for the invitation, and bye to all.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Bye. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hey, Jackie.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you're going to, is it possible for you to tag me? Or is it just too many people to tag? I can just do my own post because I did.
Oh, what I'll do is, I'm also